One of the fundamental differences between building systems and architectural desktop and AutoCAD are the type of objects that you can use in the program. In ADT and ABS there are what we call AEC objects, and these are different types of things in the program compared to AutoCAD entities. And entities are lines, polylines, arcs, boxes, circles, text, M-text. In those situations, pretty much what you see is what you get, and their display is controlled mainly by the layer. With an object, there are multiple ways to display that object, and it's still the same object without making a layer change. For instance, those types of settings are controlled by the display manager, and that is the central location for making display changes within the ABS and ADT programs. And the end result of those changes are usually controlled here by setting a display configuration. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but let's first talk about the objects themselves and their representations. So that is going to be best talked about in the display manager, because we can see the different options available for the different types of objects. You can see here that Display Manager breaks down the display hierarchy into three separate sections, and we're going to start with the objects themselves. So if we expand our representations by object section, we'll see here all the different types of objects made available between ABS and ADT. In this case we're using building systems, which sits on top of ADT, so all of their objects are included here along with ABS objects. We'll see these are all objects that building systems and ADT recognize in the program. These are additional objects beyond the typical lines, polylines, arcs that are used in AutoCAD. So we'll see here that we have things like ducts, duct fittings, and duct flex, all the way down, at least in the building system side, things like electrical panels, MV parts, pipes. So that gives us the flexibility to control the display of these objects in different ways while still having the same object in place. So we'll use ductwork as an example here, and we'll see that we have multiple ways to display the way ductwork appears in a drawing. So we've got our one-line display representation, two-line. These are the main ones you will be using. So one-line, two-line, plan, and model. Those are the main ones that you're going to be used. You'll see that you also have ones for screened, and those are situations where they are going to be having a screened or grayed out appearance, and we can make that change at a display representation level. But the important thing to note here is that this is a representation that will apply to all objects, all duct objects in the drawing. So this isn't necessarily a system-specific setting or an object-specific setting. This is for all duct objects in the entire drawing. So we can go ahead and use something like a two-line as an example here, and you'll see what the program is doing is it's taking the object itself, the duct object, and breaking it into multiple display components. And what we talk about when we talk about display components are the different things that you see in the drawing and the way that those things are displayed. So the main item in basically the boundary of a duct, for instance, is going to be what we call the contour. So if we were to go ahead and change visibility settings of the contour, we're going to change the way the outside of that duct looks. So let's go ahead and draw something in the program here so we can make changes to it. So if I go ahead, I'm just going to open up our add duct command. And just draw a simple duct here. We can go ahead and now go back into our display manager, and I will go into our duct display rep, or just duct object type. And what we will see here is that we move across the top here. These are called display sets, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. But the important thing is one of these sets is going to be active at one given time. And that active set is going to choose which display rep is used to display these objects. So right now we can see that for the current active display set, we have only one display rep used, and that's what you want, is only one, and that is the plan display rep. So I can make changes to any of these other ones, and they're not going to change the way that object appears right now. But the important thing, and this is part of the flexibility of the display manager and objects, is that we could choose to use those settings that we would change on another display rep at a different time. And it's still the same object, but it's going to be displayed in a different way. So in this situation, let's go ahead and make changes to our plan display representation, because that is the one that's used right now, and that is the primary one that you will be using for two-line display. The main difference between plan and two-line is plan uses the hidden line display. So the hidden line display is a very useful tool when producing construction documents and doing coordination, but it also is a feature that does consume a significant amount of processing resources. So this is something to be keeping in mind, and there are additional pieces of content and documents that you can go over regarding that hidden lines feature. That's not what we're talking about here. Let's just make some changes to our plan display representation. So the plan display representations here, you'll see that we have additional components, and that's evidence of the hidden line routine being active here. We'll see beyond just contour, we now have contour hidden. So what the program is really doing is basically breaking up the objects into situations where they need to display in a hidden method. So we'll see here that we have our contour settings still available, and we can go ahead and turn it off, for instance, and we'll see here that the outside of this duct is going to be not displayed, not visible. So we'll see here that we can only see, in this situation, the label that was added to it, and if we try to select it, we can't select it because nothing's there. So I'm going to quickly jump into a 3D view here so we can see it again if we want to and select it. But I'm going to go just to show you that it's not gone. It's just we've chosen to not display it. Well, I'm going to jump back to the top, and we'll see that it's no longer there, but we'll get it back here. So if we go back into our display manager, and go back into our plan, we can turn this back on. Now you'll see here that we have a setting for layer, color, line type, line weight, and LT scale. And these are unique to each individual component, so you could set them in any way that you want. The important thing that you'll note here is that the main non-hidden components, so contour, connector, annotation, centerline, insulation, lining, and rise drop here, what we have is that they are set up in a 0 layer. Now what that's going to allow the program to do is apply the layer to that particular object according to the system that it lies on. So that's usually how people want the program set up. So you're going to want to make sure it's on layer 0, and then the system will actually go ahead and apply that layering for you. The same thing goes to color, line type, and line weight. You're going to want to set it to by block, so it's going to inherit the color, line type, and line weight of the layer that you've done and chosen here. Now the difference here on a hidden component is they've gone ahead and chosen the same layer to be used for different types of components here. So we're actually applying a layer here, so regardless of the system that the duct is contained on, it's still going to display as the same layer. So if you wanted to change the overall display of your hidden lines in the drawing, you would need to only change this layer settings in your layer manager. You wouldn't even need to change any of these items. So that with that setting set, you're going to need to use a by layer across the board so that it's picking up the correct settings for that layer. Rise drop is kind of an anomaly there in that you do want it to be a 0 layer and by layer across the board here, and those are for other reasons we're not going to cover here. But the representations here allow us to make overall changes to the object types themselves. So if I were to set the color here to magenta, my color will be magenta regardless of the system that I choose to use here. We'll see right here that it's still magenta, even though the system color is most likely going to be different. That is an override over any of the settings on the system because the display manager makes changes in a global way. essentially overriding any of the layering that's been set by the system definition itself. So the duct system or pipe system would be overridden in that scenario, again because the display manager sets down global settings.